From WQAD News 8, my name is Joe McCoy, and you are listening to Sports with the Real McCoy. Today we're going to break down the biggest game of the year, Super Bowl 57 between the Chiefs and Eagles, what ended up being an absolutely tremendous Super Bowl. Ended on a bit of a controversy, which we'll get into later in this show, but you take the game, 58 and a half minutes of it. It was an absolutely tremendous game. The Chiefs ended up winning Super Bowl 57, winning their second Super Bowl in the past few years, 38-35 over the Philadelphia Eagles. A game that had a bit of everything. It had a lot of offense. It had a couple of nice defensive plays. A huge fumble by Jalen Hurts that the Chiefs took for a touchdown. Big punt return. So just an incredible back and forth game, and it really looked like these were the best two teams in the NFL, which is what you want to see in the Super Bowl. No one ever enjoys a Super Bowl where it's lopsided and it seems pretty clear that one team is better than the other, and we certainly did not have this in this case. So congrats to the Kansas City Chiefs, first off, on an incredible season. A lot of people doubted them coming into the year with losing Tyreek Hill. People weren't sure how Patrick Mahomes was going to be able to respond to that, but he showed that he is still the best quarterback in the NFL right now. I don't really think that's up for debate. And that even on this hurt ankle, which he re-aggravated during the game, he's still able to push through and take his team to the promised land. So we're going to start off with some numbers in the game. Mahomes' numbers aren't gaudy at all. 21 for 27, 182 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did have a huge rush play, though, and ended up finishing with 6 carries and 44 rushing yards. So Mahomes kind of did everything he had to do. It was a gutty performance. Again, no gaudy numbers from him. Those were more from Jalen Hurts. But Mahomes made the throws when he had to. A couple of big runs, as I mentioned, and mistake-free football, which is in the Super Bowl, there's probably nothing more important than playing mistake-free football. Receiving-wise, we all knew Travis Kelce was going to have a big game, had the first touchdown for the Kansas City Chiefs. He ended up with 6 receptions for 81 yards. We talk about it every damn week. How does a team stop Travis Kelce? He's the biggest weapon. Can't you just double-team him? No matter what, every single week he goes out there, puts up a touchdown, gives you big play after big play. The guy is just, he's up there for greatest tight end of all time, or at least greatest receiving tight end of all time. That's a debate for another day. But also Juju Smith-Schuster with 7 receptions, 53 yards. And then Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore, only with 1 reception each, but they both went for a touchdown. So for Sky Moore, the rookie out of Western Michigan, pretty incredible to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl in your rookie year. And for Kadarius Toney, who the Chiefs traded a third-round pick for from the Giants in the season, he comes out there, had a massive punt return during the game, which really was one of the key plays that fully shifted the momentum in the Chiefs' way and allowed them to go ahead and end up winning the game. But he also had a 5-yard touchdown reception. So those two guys, again, not a ton of production, but both scoring touchdowns in the Super Bowl. Nothing to complain about there. And then on the Eagles side, offensively, Jalen Hurts, you got to give the man his flowers for this game. 27 of 38, 304 yards, and a touchdown. 1 passing touchdown. He also had 3 rushing touchdowns, which I'm going to get into that a bit later because I find it interesting how much he's being praised for these rushing touchdowns when Justin Fields goes out and does that and everyone says, well, Justin Fields can't throw. That's a different debate. Don't get me started on that. But you got to give Jalen Hurts his flowers, as I said. Came up in the biggest stage in the entire world and had a great game. Was only sacked twice, had a QBR of 79.7. And just, it was a really phenomenal game. Had the very costly fumble. Was looking to escape out of the pocket. Ball just slipped out of his arms. Chiefs ended up returning it for a defensive touchdown. But other than that, one of those kind of fluky plays, Jalen Hurts did everything to give the Philadelphia Eagles a chance to win this game. A huge storyline that was talked about after the game was the fact that the Eagles, which led the NFL in sacks this season, had over 70 sacks in the regular season, did not touch Patrick Mahomes once in terms of getting a sack on him. A lot of people say that's because of the field, which we'll talk about later as well. The field was a complete mess, even though the NFL spent $800,000 on this field alone. Spent 2 years to grow it, give it all this special treatment, and it still was a horrible playing surface. Was very slippery. But yeah, the Chiefs' offensive line, we had talked about them on previous episodes. Best pass protection win rate in the entire NFL, and they showed up on the biggest stage. And when you look at the Chiefs' Super Bowl against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a couple of years ago, The reason they lost that game, or at least didn't have a chance to win, was because Patrick Mahomes was constantly under duress. So the Chiefs went out, addressed that offensive line. They drafted Creed Humphrey last season. They drafted Trey Smith in the 6th round, who ended up being a complete diamond in the rough for them. They went out, they got Orlando Brown. They got Joe Thuney from the Patriots, So they just went out there, completely rebolstered their offensive line, put a wall in front of their $500 million quarterback Patrick Mahomes, and that was why they lost the Super Bowl against the Bucs, and a huge reason why they were able to win the Super Bowl against the Eagles this year, because they kept Patrick Mahomes protected. They gave him time in the pocket, and it was huge. So, both defenses really were not impressive in this game. Obviously, very high scoring, 38-35. The only turnover that was generated was off of that Jalen Hurts fumble, which wasn't anything to do with what the Chiefs were doing. He just simply dropped the ball. But both offenses kind of had their ways with these two defenses, and we kind of semi-expected that coming in. There was a lot of hate on the Eagles defense, a lot of NFL players on the 49ers saying that this defense was going to get exposed by the Chiefs, that the secondary isn't good, and they're just being carried by the front seven. That's up for debate, but I think that you had two offenses, which I believe these were the two most high-scoring offenses in the entire NFL, and that was fully on display in the Super Bowl, which as fans, that's what you want to see. No one wants to see a Super Bowl that's 13-10 or whatever it was when the Patriots or Rams played. No one wants a defensive Super Bowl. It's so boring to watch. Yes, I appreciate good defense. I love seeing good defensive schemes, and that 2018 Bears defense, which was just one of the best defenses I've ever seen. It's awesome to watch. But in the Super Bowl, you want offense, you want touchdowns, you want big plays. No one wants to see offenses going 3 and out. It's just boring to watch. So hats off to both these teams for really showing up on the biggest stage. Both teams really played incredibly well, and that's all you can ask for as a fan in the Super Bowl. But I think the biggest difference in this game probably came down to coaching. And I don't say this to hate on the Eagles coaching staff. I think that they're definitely headed in the right direction, even though they just lost their offensive and defensive coordinator to head coaching positions. The defensive coordinator ended up signing with the Arizona Cardinals, and their offensive coordinator is now the head coach for the Indianapolis Colts. So Nick Sirianni in his second year taking your team to the Super Bowl, that's incredible. He deserves lots of praises for that. But I do think that Andy Reid's offensive genius is the main reason why the Chiefs win this game. And the reason I say that is because on those 2 touchdowns from Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney, they were basically the exact same play, just opposite sides. But the way they were set up on previous plays to then get those plays open is what makes Andy Reid such a genius. And I got to give credit to Dan Orlovsky on ESPN and NFL Live. He's an incredible analyst, incredible incredibly breaking down film, and he really brought this to the light, and how the Chiefs, they were noticing the way that the Eagles were covering pre-snap these jet motions. So, they have Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney, the Chiefs do on offense, 2 receivers who are really shifty, quick twitched guys. And the way that the Eagles were covering them pre-snap is they were rolling their coverage. And what that means is that whoever was guarding Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney in the slot, the nickel cornerback, if those guys went across the formation, the nickel cornerback would then drop to safety, and then the safety who was in the middle of the field is now going to take Kadarius Toney or Sky Moore. So what happens when you do that is it kind of leads the guy who's going from nickel corner to safety kind of in this no man land for just a split second. But in the NFL, all you need is a split second to get wide open. So that nickel cornerback would come over to the safety position, but what the Chiefs would do is they would just snap it and have Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney break back out and not complete the run across the formation, leaving them for wide open touchdowns. So on TV, it looks like, oh my God, that's a totally broken coverage by the Eagles, and it kind of is, but it more is just tremendous scheme by Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy realizing that this is how the Eagles are covering this, and this is how we can exploit that. And I think what the key is here is that when the Chiefs did it the first time on the touchdown to Kadarius Toney, the Eagles didn't adjust. And that, I think, is what is so key. The Chiefs were adjusting through the game, seeing how the Eagles were reading these coverages, and recalling specific plays for that. But when the Eagles got burned on it the first time, they continued to roll their coverage. So the Chiefs would set it up. They ran an end around with Sky Moore, saw that they were still rolling the coverage, and what did they do? Very next play, ran the fake motion with Sky Moore. Sky Moore breaks it back outside, wide open touchdown. So I think that really is a dock on the Eagles' defensive coaching staff, because they have got to realize that, okay, we already got beat on this once. We cannot keep rolling our coverage. If we keep doing this, they have a chance to run it again, which they did, and score another touchdown on it. So I think the Eagles should have switched, maybe go to more of a zone in the red zone, so that way you don't have all these guys moving around pre-snap, getting out of position, all that jazz. But Andy Reid is just an offensive genius, and it was on full display, because in this game the Eagles had a convincing lead at one point. They went into halftime up 24-10. You think a team with such a good pass rush like the Eagles have would be able to generate some more pressure on Patrick Mahomes in that second half. And also Mahomes went down at the end of the second quarter with that ankle injury, re-aggravating that high ankle sprain. So it looked like the Eagles were really in command, which they were at certain points. But the Chiefs came out of halftime, adjusted extremely well, and they held the Eagles offensively to only 3 points in the third quarter and only 8 points in the fourth quarter. So defensively, they made great adjustments, and the Chiefs saved their best quarter of football for the fourth quarter. 17 points on offense. One of those touchdowns, the touchdown to Sky Moore, set up by the huge kick return by Kadarius Toney. And that's what ended up putting a ring on the Kansas City Chiefs' finger and leaving the Eagles without any diamonds. So football, to me, is such a fascinating sport. 98% of the game is played before that ball is even snapped. And I think it's a sport where there's no sport where coaching is more important than football, in my opinion. And I think that the Kansas City Chiefs they got the greatest quarterback in the league, and they have probably the greatest offensive coach in the league in Andy Reid. And those two brains together, it's the reason why they have 2 Super Bowls, and the reason why they're going to be playing in many more, because as long as they're together, like it was with Brady and Belichick, even though Belichick's a defensive coordinator, when you put the best quarterback and one of the best coaches together, that's a recipe for Super Bowls. So it was a phenomenal game, and I want to talk about the controversy a little bit with the holding penalty that was called against Bradbury on Juju Smith-Schuster late in the fourth quarter. Basically is what ended the game, allowed the Chiefs to run out the clock until 8 seconds, kicked the game-winning field goal. Eagles only had a Hail Mary shot at the end. Here's the thing. Do I think that was a penalty? Yes. Do I think that penalty should have been called? No. It's unfortunate that such a tremendous game had to basically end because of the refs. Or not end, but it didn't allow the Eagles a shot to drive down the field and either tie it up or go on a game-winning drive. I actually think the refs were quite good throughout the entire game. I really do. I'm disappointed that it ended in controversy because of the refs, but I really think the refs called a very good game. I think, James Bradbury admitted after the game that it was holding. They interviewed him, and I got to give props to him for doing that. That is a stand-up guy. That is a stand-up move to do that. But the reporters asked him, did you hold him? He said, yeah, I grabbed his jersey. I tugged on it. He actually tugged on it a couple times, and I was hoping the refs were going to let it slide, and they didn't. And the Eagles, too. Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts, in their press conferences, didn't blame the game at all on that one call. Football is a 60-minute game. One play is not what determines whether you win or lose. So I do want to give kudos to the Eagles and Bradbury's for not trying to complain about the refs or anything like that. But I just think it was a tough spot to make that call, and I don't think having replay, being able to review a penalty would have fixed this, because the NFL tried to do that a couple of years ago where you could review pass interference, and that just went abysmally. And in this case, if they go to a review, and let's say there's a review chance, if that's an opportunity to review the penalty, that's not going to help in this situation, because by the book, it's a penalty. He grabs his jersey out of his break, and he holds them from being able to create more separation. That is a penalty. And you can't watch that in a replay and go, well, it is a penalty, but there's 2 minutes left in the Super Bowl. We're not going to call it. You cannot create a precedent like that. So I think it was a penalty. I wish the ref wouldn't have called it. I'm not as upset as other people are that he did. And I also, one thing I want to address is a lot of people are saying, well, the ball was uncatchable. He had no chance of getting that. The ball was basically thrown out of the back of the end zone. That is a completely moot point in the situation because the call was holding, not pass interference. And holding is called when the ball is still in the quarterback's hand. So Patrick Mahomes could have thrown that ball to Florida. It wouldn't have mattered. It's still a penalty. Juju Smith-Schuster was held while he was running his route before Patrick Mahomes threw the ball, and it does not matter where the ball lands on the field of play to call the holding penalty. So people arguing that argument is not valid because holding does not matter. It doesn't come into a play where the ball, if it's uncatchable or not. So again, phenomenal game. Hats off to both teams. Wish it wouldn't have ended the way it did, but I think I was about to say I do think the better team prevailed. And I don't know if that's fair to say because I think these two teams are extremely even. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think these two teams could play 10 times, and it could end up being a 5-5 split. But the better team on this day won, and the Kansas City Chiefs are now 2-time Super Bowl champions in the past 5 years. So congratulations to them, and it's a tough pill to swallow for the Eagles. And I want to transition a bit to the Eagles here now because they are a team that is kind of fascinating to me right now. Howie Roseman is an incredible general manager. The fact that they had Nick Foles, they won a Super Bowl with Nick Foles, and then just a few years later, they're back in the Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts. That is an incredible feat for a general manager. But the Eagles have a crap ton of free agents, and they're not going to be able to re-sign most of them. Currently, they're negative $1 million in cap space, so they're going to have to clear some cap space there. And Jalen Hurts is probably going to get his extension this season, which is going to be north of at least $40, if not $45 million. We can argue whether he's worth that money. I personally do not think he is worth that $40 million, $45 million price tag. But when you're the quarterback of the team that plays in the Super Bowl and you also played very well in the Super Bowl, that's the market price. But once they pay Jalen Hurts, a huge portion of your salary cap is now taken up by him, and you're not going to be able to build as good of a roster around him. They're going to have to pay Devonta Smith soon as well. They're already paying A.J. Brown, their other star receiver. But getting into the list of their free agents, you have Fletcher Cox, who's old but still a solid depth piece on that defensive line. Brandon Graham, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Javon Hargrave, who had a monster year, 16.5 sacks, is going to get a really big contract here in free agency. Jason Kelce, who's not sure if he's going to retire yet. He had talked about retiring before the season. Probably the best center in the entire NFL, but he's 34 years old, getting up there in age. It'll be up to him to see if he retires or not. You got James Bradbury, Isaac Seumalo. They're really good offensive guard, who I hope the Bears sign. You got T.J. Edwards, they're a really good linebacker, who I also hope the Bears sign. Robert Quinn, who they traded a fourth-round pick for from the Chicago Bears during the season. Ndamukong Suh, Linval Joseph, their running back Miles Sanders, and also Kaiser White. A lot of guys who are either starters or really good depth pieces, mostly on the defense is where their free agents are. But they're going to lose Robert Quinn. I don't imagine they're going to sign him to an extension or re-sign him. Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph, they brought in just to be depth pieces on that defensive line. Miles Sanders, let's see if they're willing to pay a running back high money. And then you got those guys in the back end and also on the front seven on the defensive line who are probably going to go somewhere else in the offseason. And then not even to mention their offensive line with Jason Kelce and Isaac Seumalo. Those are two starters on their offensive line who are incredible offensive linemen that they could lose both of them. And now you have two open spots on your offensive line. And unless those are filled with either draft picks or free agents, or maybe they feel like they have guys who are in backup positions now that can be starters next year, that offensive line is not going to be as good as it was this year. And that was their trademark. The trademark of the Eagles this year was their offensive defensive line. And I think those two things are going to take a massive hit this offseason. Now, for Eagles fans, there's a lot of hope because you have two first-round draft picks. You have the 10th overall pick from the New Orleans Saints in the trade-up that they did for Chris Olave, or either Chris Olave or Trevor Penning, whichever one they moved up in the first round for last year. And then you also have the 30th overall pick in the draft, which is their own pick. So they have the resources to get quality impact players right off the bat. But they don't have a lot of cap space, and they're going to have a good amount of holes to fill. And not only starter positions to fill, but they're not going to have as good a depth as they had this year. They were an incredibly deep team, especially on that defensive line. And they're just not going to have the resources to have that type of depth like they did this year. So Howie Roseman is going to have an incredible offseason because once you pay your quarterback, which everyone is expecting them to give Jalen Hurts his extension this year, it makes it a lot harder to build a complete team. So the Eagles are in a really interesting spot. I'm going to be super intrigued to watch them next season to see if they're able to repeat the success that they had this year. Because a lot of times teams, it's football. It is impossible. It is not impossible, but it's extremely difficult to have long-term success like the Chiefs are having right now, or like the Patriots, of course, had for 20 years. But it's going to be a really, really interesting offseason for the Eagles. Now, like I said, I hope that the Bears sign two of their players. I think if the Bears sign Isaac Seumalo and TJ Edwards, the linebacker, that would just be two phenomenal pickups for Ryan Poles and the Chicago Bears team. But we'll see who the Eagles decide they want to bring back, who they can afford, and then what positions they look to target in the draft. I also want to talk about the halftime show here. I know this is a sports-focused show, but I'm a big Rihanna fan, and of course the halftime show is a massive part of the Super Bowl. Congratulations to Rihanna and A$AP Rocky for the upcoming second child that Rihanna is probably going to have. All hopes that goes well and that she has her second baby. So that was a big reveal, her being pregnant. I think the show was pretty good. It wasn't anything mind-blowing. I thought the set with the different levels and tiers were pretty incredible. I'd never seen that before. And I also thought the choreography and the dancers all did an absolutely tremendous job. The dancing really carried the performance in my mind. I liked the costumes. I thought Rihanna looked great in her red dress and then her coat that she wore for diamonds at the end. I wish Rihanna would have, performed a little bit more. I wish I would have seen a bit more dancing from her and stuff like that. But given the fact that she was pregnant, the fact that she's up there 150 feet in the sky on a platform singing in front of 115 million people is just remarkable in itself. But I definitely thought she delivered. It wasn't anything that was, spectacular or the greatest halftime show I've ever seen, but it was definitely solid. I think Rihanna did a tremendous job with the halftime show. And again, congrats to her and A$AP Rocky on their second baby. Hopefully everything goes well with that. But an incredible game, an incredible Super Bowl. Now all focus shifts to the offseason. For those of you who don't know, the offseason is I'm not going to say I like it more than the season, but they are really 1A and 1B. I absolutely love the offseason, especially this year with the Bears, where they have so many resources to help this team. And we're going to see what we're going to do. So next week, I have an awesome special guest joining me, Sean Hammond from Shaw Media. He is a beat writer for the Chicago Bears, so he's the guy who travels to all the games and is writing reports about them, and he's in the locker rooms talking with the players and coaches. So he's on the show next week. We're just going to talk ball, talk the Bears offseason, what we think Ryan Poles and Ian Cunningham, the assistant general manager for the Bears, will look to do in the offseason in terms of free agency and also the draft. And I'm really looking forward to that episode. So I think you guys are going to really enjoy that, especially if you're a big Bears fan and you enjoy off-season talk. That's definitely one that you should tune into. So thank you guys so much for listening today. Again, congrats to the Kansas City Chiefs on their Super Bowl win. And it's time for the offseason, time for hopefully a franchise-altering offseason that can set the Bears up for success for the long term. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you have an incredible day.